The Gerudo were never truly united. For years, Zelda lore has framed them as a powerful warrior tribe ruled by a single chief. But Age of Imprisonment showed us a version of the tribe that was much more complicated. Traveling back to the Zonai era allowed us to see a fractured civilization divided by politics, competing factions, and even different forms of magic. We got to see warriors who fought for peace and sorcerers practicing dark magic in the shadows. We saw hidden rivalries that revealed deep political tensions. And at the center of it all was a leadership struggle that may have shaped the Gerudo for generations. Because what happens to a society when your king tears the world apart, leaving a demon-sized power vacuum in his wake? While Tears of the Kingdom gave us lore crumbs about this period through Zelda's flashbacks and environmental storytelling, Age of Imprisonment finally pulled back the curtain on the Zonai-era Gerudo and allowed us to see their society firsthand. So today, we're diving deep into what we learned about the Gerudo from Age of Imprisonment. How the politics, factions, and magic systems of the Zonai-era Gerudo might just make them the most complex society in Hyrule's history. First, let's break down some of the key players of the Gerudo and their role in the story. At the beginning of the game, we are reintroduced to Ganondorf, the king of the Gerudo. As we'd learned before, he was the first male born in 100 years, and so, evidently, became the chief by default. And while there seem to be multiple bands of the Gerudo, which we'll get into later, he appears to oversee them all with supreme authority. And with his rule comes an inevitable conflict with Hyrule. Early in the story, Queen Sonia sets up the coming Hyrulean-Gerudo conflict, stating that unlike the other peoples of Hyrule, the Gerudo had not joined the Hylian alliance.
We had hoped to join hands with them as well. But their desert tribes have begun to encroach on neighboring lands, in search of more fertile territory to call home.
This is a familiar theme when it comes to tensions between Hyrule and the Gerudo. In Wind Waker, Ganondorf expresses that he invaded Hyrule because of the discrepancy between the environmental conditions of the two lands.
My country lay within a vast desert. When the sun rose into the sky, a burning wind punished my lands, searing the world. And when the moon climbed into the dark of night, a frigid gale pierced our homes. No matter when it came, the wind carried the same thing: death. But the winds that blew across the green fields of Hyrule brought something other than suffering and ruin. I coveted that wind, I suppose.
So this element isn't new to the Gerudo-Hylian relations, or frankly, to human history in general. Ganondorf's envy and resentment of the fertile lands of Hyrule run deep in his bloodline. But while Sonia says that in the past there were efforts from the Gerudo to cooperate with the continent at large,
those voices have grown far weaker of late. And I expect them to stay as such, given the Gerudo's current chieftain.
While Wind Waker's Ganondorf was purely envious of the land, this Ganondorf craved something even more treasured by the opposing kingdom: Zonai technology. It would seem that for him, the environmental concerns may have been secondary to acquiring the secret stones. Now, was that because he felt he could solve his people's problems using that powerful technology? The Zonai do seem to have the ability to manipulate aspects of the environment, as we see in some of the other civilizations. Maybe that was his initial intent, a genuine attempt to help his people. But by the time he acquires the secret stone, it seems that he was straight up power hungry, since after fusing with the stone, any pretense of caring for the Gerudo people is gone. His motivation at that point is raising a demon army and casting the world into darkness, rather than taking care of his people. So this Ganondorf would appear to have been tyrannical and traitorous from the start. But again, as Sonia points out,
he doesn't represent all of the Gerudo. Rather than war, some still seek a path of mutual prosperity.
That simple line reframes the game's conflict. Sonia makes it clear that the divisions aren't just Hyrule versus Gerudo, but also Gerudo versus Gerudo. And that brings us to another majorly influential Gerudo of this era, Artie, the future Sage of Lightning. Early on, we learned that Artie begins her story as a high-ranking Gerudo and leader of a battalion. But despite her standing, she's subservient to Ganondorf as her leader. As we see in their first cutscene together, she kneels to him and is bound by law to follow his commands, even when those commands go against what she believes in. When Artie is ordered to attack Hyrule Castle, she initially balks at the directive, questioning the king's reasoning. She doesn't want to attack the castle, as she desires peace and states that there are others who do as well. But she ultimately concedes as the Gerudo Code is clear. As Gerudo warriors, our chief's command is absolute. So she leads the raid, and during the battle, she gets on board with the plan, and even seems determined to kill Rauru herself, until an order is issued to retreat. What makes this detail so compelling is that Artie wasn't simply an internal voice of dissent. She was clearly already known in Hyrule Kingdom prior to the conflict. Even in the heat of battle, Rauru and Sonia immediately recognize her name.
Artie? Isn't she the Gerudo leader who once sought peace with Hyrule?
If so, I wonder how she came to lead a raiding party against us.
And later, Rauru says,
"Even before our armies crossed blades on the Great Plateau, I knew you would someday aspire to this unity."
These moments revealed that she was one of the most vocal proponents of peace between the nations, and was prominent enough that her name was well known outside of her lands. However, it would be this rebellious attitude against the king's wishes that would ultimately make her a target. After the battle on the Great Plateau, Ganondorf moves to have Artie and her closest group of guards murdered by Kotake and Kuume, with the dual goal of silencing Artie's dissenting views and framing her for the attack to gain an in with Rauru's court. Ganondorf tells the Hyruleans that the attack was coordinated by a group of rebels, which he has eliminated as part of his pledge of fealty. It's a brutal political move, and an ironic twist of fate, because the rebels, who wanted peace, get blamed for the war they tried to prevent. In any case, as part of the fallout of this conflict, Artie survives, but loses many of her close group of guards, and swears vengeance against Ganondorf. Artie's closest ally, Shalani, later informs Rauru that Artie was mounting a resistance within the Gerudo to take on Ganondorf, but after his ascension to Demon Kinghood, they become outnumbered and are forced to turn to the Hylian Alliance for help. Despite initially resisting aid from a former enemy, citing Gerudo independence and a desire to fight their own battles, Artie eventually embraces the Alliance, accepting the Envoy mask and eventually becoming the Zonai's Age of Lightning. During this time, Artie also rises within the Gerudo ranks to become the new chief. While it seems like a casual inauguration, surrounded by what seems to be her fellow leaders around a campfire, apparently it was a long time coming. According to Ranza, before Ganondorf's rise to power, the title was supposed to be Artie's.
If Ganondorf had never risen to power, the title would have been yours a long time ago.
Now, we don't know exactly why that is. Does that mean she was part of a royal lineage, which seems to be the case moving forward? Or was she simply viewed as the most powerful? The game, unfortunately, doesn't tell us. In the moment, though, the decision to appoint Artie seems to be universal, and a peaceful transition of power. However, it's later revealed in Ranza's ally quest that she's been secretly bitter about Artie's coronation. She wants to prove she's stronger and can take the throne for herself.
This isn't good enough. I have to get even stronger so that I can outshine Artie and become chief myself.
This moment, while small and totally missable, was deeply interesting to me, as it seems to raise questions about the selection process of the chief. In other games, the role of chief appears to be passed through a matriarchal monarchy. That is, when a male heir is not an option. By the time of Breath of the Wild, the throne has been passed down to Urbosa and Riju, who are stated to be direct descendants of Artie. This would suggest that at that point, a matrilineal succession had been re-established. But it's interesting that during this era, the refounding period, that line of succession was not a given, and was perhaps instead a strength-based position going to whichever warrior the tribe viewed as the strongest. So now, let's zoom out and talk about the bigger picture to see what else we can learn from Gerudo politics and their civilization at this time. In addition to casting doubt on their leadership selection process, Age of Imprisonment also showed us how deeply fractured the Gerudo actually were. Thanks to this game, we now know there were multiple factions of the tribe. We can clearly identify at least three. Three separate groups of the Gerudo who each follow a different leader and are each connected to a different facet of the Gerudo's lore. Let's take a closer look at each of the groups and how their leader's magic is connected to Gerudo culture. First, there's Ganondorf's Legion of Loyalists. This is his inner circle, which includes the group in this scene, as well as his closest advisors, Kotake and Kuume. This group seems very different from the other Gerudo. They wear dark clothes, have distinctive hair and makeup looks, and, importantly, appear to be dark magic users. Ganondorf himself utilizes monster parts to generate his phantoms, and Kotake and Kuume have the ability to manipulate the shades. It's not really openly discussed in the game, but I suspect this group is affiliated with necromancy and are meant to represent the dark side of the Gerudo's relationship with death. Throughout its many appearances in the Zelda franchise, the Gerudo Desert is often associated with death, the afterlife, and reanimated spirits. In Ocarina of Time, you can only reach the Gerudo's sacred spirit temple, located in the Haunted Wasteland, with the help of a ghost. In Twilight Princess, we're introduced to Arbiter's Grounds, an execution site that became home to scores of violent spirits and the undead. In Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, remnants of a violent past scattered the desert. Tombs filled with re-dead, haunted burial grounds, and a pyramid housing hundreds of sarcophagi all point to a history filled with bloodshed. But the Gerudo's relationship with death may be more spiritually connected to the real-world civilizations that inspired them. Namely, the ancient Egyptians, whose relationship with the afterlife and the desert was a core part of their mythology. And in our world, and the world of Hyrule, the environmental conditions make sense. The desert is a world defined by extremes. Hot and cold, light and dark, life and death. So having death rituals, dark magic, and necromancy be an integral part of the Gerudo mythos makes a lot of sense. Our second group is Artie's team. This is her core group of guards, including Shalani. While Ganon's crew favors dark clothes, this group tends to wear greenish hues like Artie does, echoing their allegiance to her. Shalani even has green attack colors. Given that she's Artie's right-hand woman, and evidently harbors a secret love for her, having her match Artie so closely underscores that deep loyalty. It's not totally clear how big Artie's faction really is. It seems like she has a core group of around 7 warriors, but Kotake and Koume also call the army we fight on the Great Plateau her army, so she might have thousands under her command. But regardless of the size, the Gerudo of this faction seem to be steadfastly on Artie's side. Whether she's seeking peace with Hyrule or seeking revenge on Ganondorf, they will follow her into battle. Artie's magic power is control over lightning. This one is interesting as it feels a bit newer to Gerudo culture, primarily being featured in the Wilds games. Lightning magic appears to be a genetically passed trait, as to our knowledge it's exclusively held by Artie and her descendants, Urbosa and Riju. But based on the Lightning Temple's presence, which presumably dates back to the arrival of the Zonai, the lightning power may have been a gift bestowed by the Zonai upon the royal line of Gerudo women at the time, thus indicating the Zonai-approved line of succession. Perhaps this plays into why Artie was naturally considered to be the clear choice for leader after Ganondorf, and why she was the one to advocate for peace between the kingdoms. But then we have our third group, led by Ronza. Ronza is described as leading an independent faction of the Gerudo, and she has to be convinced by Calamo to join the resistance. While we don't really get to see her group, we know it exists from the in-game text. And I thought this detail was one of the more fascinating revelations of the game, as it's what made me realize the Gerudo had a multitude of factions, rather than just the 2 obvious camps. And Ronza, interestingly, has her own elemental battle capacity, as she demonstrates the power to generate sandstorms through her attacks, in a similar sort of way to Queen Gibdo. So let's take a closer look at this sandstorm magic. Now, sand is obviously a defining feature of the desert. It's coarse, and it gets everywhere. It's something that the Gerudo of the Ocarina era incorporated into their mythology, as demonstrated by the temple dedicated to the goddess of sand. And as for wind, we saw in the clip earlier that Wind Waker Ganondorf describes how wind in the Gerudo Desert was synonymous with death. So having sandstorm wielders in the game, combining those desert features of sand and wind, makes sense thematically. But what's interesting is that we have both enemy and ally users, as both Queen Gibdo and Ronza utilize the sand tornado style attacks. So it's not necessarily associated with good or evil. It's treated more like a force of nature that can be used by either side. So, 3 factions, 3 leaders, 3 different kinds of magic. But there certainly could have been more. And if I may dip into conspiracy mode for a second, I'd be willing to wager that there could have been 7 groups to correspond with the 7 heroines of legend, who were each said to embody a different aspect of a great power. So perhaps those heroines could have represented the leader of each faction. But I digress. All that is to say that there may have been many factions, since we can infer from the game that Gerudo people of this era may have been organized more loosely than the modern Gerudo of Riju's reign. Ganondorf, despite being the supreme leader, doesn't even appear to have a throne room. Rather, he has attendants set up a stone throne wherever he happens to be. So it's possible there wasn't a centralized Gerudo town like in Breath of the Wild. Despite this, he maintains authority over all the clans, likely due to their strict honor code and adherence to ancestral law. But what happened to their society after Ganondorf became the Demon King? The dialogue of the game seems to imply that upon receiving the Secret Stone, he completely abandoned his people.
I see. Even you have not been spared.
The villain has a massive army of monsters. None are safe, including all of those who put their trust in his leadership.
Putting his own tribe to the sword. It's simply unthinkable.
Ganondorf certainly demonstrates that he will steamroll anyone in his way to power, even his own people, when he tries to take out Artie and her allies. That, and the fact that we don't fight any Gerudo in the second half of the game, makes me inclined to believe that once he absorbed the Secret Stone, he left his people behind. Even though I was desperately hoping to see a group of Dark Gerudo remain loyal to him and be a threat to us later in the game, we didn't see that play out. However, as I've said before in previous videos, there was evidence in Tears of the Kingdom of a conflict within the Gerudo. The prison cells and burial ground of traitors felt to me like the aftermath of a civil war and an implied punishment for those who joined Ganondorf in the conflict. But I don't know, I still think there's something and that dialogue could be open to interpretation. I mean, even though we don't fight the Dark Gerudo, we also don't see any of them fighting with us either, so maybe they were off doing bad stuff. Just because Shalani said they weren't safe doesn't mean they were actually dead. And there is that mysterious 6-month gap where Ganondorf was posted up at the castle that we don't know about. Personally, between that and Twinrova's absence from the endgame, I still think there's plenty of material for a Gerudo War DLC so we can see what Artie's resistance actually meant. But that's probably just me clinging to any hope. Koei Tecmo, from one KT to another, I need you to come through. But whether that civil war ever gets explored or not, what Age of Imprisonment gave us is genuinely exciting. The Zonai-era Gerudo weren't a monolith, but rather a civilization with competing loyalties, ancient traditions, and real political fault lines. From Ganondorf's dark ambitions, to Artie's quiet heroism, to Ronza's simmering rivalry, every faction adds a new layer to a people we thought we understood. Of course, Artie wasn't the first Gerudo to turn against Ganondorf. We have Nabooru in Ocarina of Time to thank for that. But Age of Imprisonment is significant in hinting at a greater extent of infighting within the Gerudo than what we've seen before. It even makes me wonder if maybe that civil war that I've been searching for wasn't part of the Demon King's wake, but from some future war lost to the sands of time. There are still so many questions about the Gerudo, but I love that a game like Age of Imprisonment allowed us to uncover new cracks in their civilization, and just might make them the most politically interesting and mysterious race in Hyrule. So, what do you think? Could there have been even more groups of the Gerudo vying for control of the desert? What role would you like to see them play in future games? If you want to keep exploring the world of the Gerudo, I've linked some interesting videos in the description so you can keep digging into the topic. Huge thanks to my special guest stars, Capt Bergerson, Triforce Times, Geek Apprentice, and Lily Hyrule for their voiceovers. And a big thanks to all of you for watching. As always, I'll see you in the next video.